Hello, I'm James Warren.
And I'm Andy Cushen.
And this is the Denver Urbanism Podcast, a podcast on all things city building in the unaffordable city of Denver.
Well, we have been talking about land use in the sense that we wanted to talk about land use for the last 3 episodes, and now we're finally doing it. And I'm so pleased to have some folks from YIMBY here today. Just a bit of history for anybody listening to this. YIMBY, in some ways, kind of started with the blog and Ken Schropel and the sort of efforts there, 10 years ago, and now to kind of be interviewing YIMBY people who have all of these wins that have nothing to do with this little blog that we have now. Feels very full circle. So I'm here with Robert Greer, and I'm here with Anna DeWitt. Robert Greer is a lead with Yes in My Backyard, YIMBY Denver. He's a tenants' right nonprofit attorney by day and a native plant grower and environmental advocate by night. Rob is an alum of UCLA and the University of Chicago Law School and lives in Denver with his wife and 2 young children. And then Anna and I have known each other for several years now. Anna is a passionate advocate for affordable housing, a dedicated special education teacher, and a proud single mother. With over 10 years of experience teaching Denver public schools, she saw firsthand the critical need for accessible, equitable housing in the community. And as a member of the executive committee, Anna works tirelessly to promote housing solutions that benefit everyone, particularly those who have been historically marginalized. Her advocacy efforts date back to 2017, and she's been a consistent voice for progressive housing policies since. In addition to her work with YIMBY Denver, Anna has served on the board of DCTA, the state's largest teachers union. She was actively involved in the 2019 teachers strike, which advocated for better funding and working conditions in public education. And her housing advocacy extends beyond organizational roles, including policies to end group living restrictions, repurposing defunct golf courses, and developing affordable and accessible housing in Denver. Anna brings a unique perspective to affordable housing advocacy, combining her background in education, grassroots organizing, and policy work to build stronger, more inclusive communities. So excited to have you both on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Excited to be here.
So, there is so much that we could talk about. And so I sent you both some information ahead of time. But it's because we have to be focused. There's so much to talk about YIMBY in Denver. So I guess I just want to start by kind of clarifying for anyone listening who has been under a rock, has no clue, has never heard of Jared Polis and all of the stuff that happened last year. What is YIMBY? Like, what are the values of YIMBY? How do you see YIMBY in action in Denver? And I mean, if a listener gets tempted, how do they get involved? Like, what is it?
Yeah, so I would say our main goal is creating a vibrant Denver, creating a place where everyone has a place to live, not just affordable, accessible. And we're kind of the anti-NIMBYs, right? So a lot of NIMBY being not in my backyard, of course, they tend to show up at meetings saying no to everything. No safe bike paths. No, I don't want this building. No, I don't want that. And this has unfortunately restricted housing, made it much more expensive. And so we're here to give a different voice to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the main value that we share at YIMBY is that we really think that everybody who's already here should get to stay here. People who want to move here should get to come here. People who have already been displaced from Denver deserve to be able to move back. So we take a hard look at the research around affordability and how to create it, and around displacement and how to avoid it. And we push for policies that we think will achieve those goals.
So Yes in My Backyard, is a very memorable phrase. It is also, though, everyone's backyards. It is, our community kind of backyard. It's not just like literally ADUs, we've done it, and now backyards are full of new things, and that's it, right? So can you just talk a little bit about like some recent YIMBY sort of deliveries? Like what has YIMBY been involved with, that we would have known?
I mean, a couple things that we've done in partnership with a lot of other organizations, because this is a pretty big ecosystem. But, we've been involved with the fight to curtail occupancy limits in various places around Colorado and now statewide. Curtailing parking minimums is something that we've had a really big hand in and that we're very proud of, because that makes housing more affordable and it makes cities just more livable generally. There was some legislation last year that required some suburbs to build more multifamily housing around transit, which increases the housing supply and reduces pollution compared to the alternative of exurban sprawl. We're very proud of that. We also fight for tenant protections in court. That's very important to me as a tenant attorney. We helped Just Cause get passed. I mean, we were, pretty minor on that, but we're part of these coalitions to get these tenant protections passed, making it easier for tenants to fight their landlords in court to get repairs done or to defend against an eviction action for non-payment or what have you. Yeah, I mean, it really has to be a multifaceted strategy when you're talking about avoiding displacement. The affordability is, I think, probably by far the biggest single criterion for that, because 90% roughly of eviction cases in Colorado are for non-payment of rent. So if you're not addressing the cost of living crisis, then you're not going to be addressing the displacement crisis. If we can get things like just cause protections for tenants, better procedural protections for tenants in court, those are also really helpful for avoiding displacement.
It's interesting in looking like where we started too. So we began in 2016 as a group of 5 fearless leaders who went to a conference called YIMBY Town. Were really motivated to start their own chapter. And when we began, we were just very passionate, and we would show up to city council meetings supporting one sole project, right? That's actually how I got involved with YIMBY. I saw this. I was so inspired by these people who sat in these terrible chairs for hours advocating for this. And so that's why I got involved. But looking at where we were, we've only been involved in state legislation for 2 years. This is our second session we've been involved. And it's been amazing to see like what we've been able to accomplish, who has invited us to the table. We have people on our team who sit with Polis's people asking their opinion on like, what should we do regarding this policy? I know Kevin's been working on with, oh my gosh, help me out, our land use policy. Oh my goodness, right?
Just for the context, Kevin is on our executive committee, and he has, I believe, a master's in environmental policy.
Yes.
So he's very in the thick of it with regards to like land use and transportation policy, specifically as it relates to housing.
I think one thing that's striking me right now is that NIMBY existed as not a organized movement, but just usually a bunch of people who don't want change to happen in cities, which almost are defined by change.
Getting old means getting crotchety sometimes.
Right.
It just does.
I feel
I didn't say old, okay?
I said it. All right, you can quote me.
And YIMBY was formed as a reaction to that. But the way I see YIMBY today isn't reactive at all.
Yeah.
It's incredibly proactive.
Yeah.
I mean, would you say that that's a transformation, or from the get-go, have you been a proactive group?
No, I mean, I do agree. Because we were fighting these smaller battles, right? It's almost like we were also reacting to this bigger voice. It felt very intimidating, right? We were 5 out of 100 maybe who were seemingly screaming into the void, stop, no, we want this. So, I mean, we've grown to be more proactive, to look more into the future, to make these connections within our community. And I have to say, like, maybe I even shouldn't say this, I understand the NIMBY heart, right? Because change can be scary, right? But what we're doing is restricting any sort of movement forward. And we're just restricting our children, our peers from having any sort of success. And also just the distrust in the government as well. Because I mean, a lot of the problems we have is due to zoning laws enforced by the government, right? Like created by the government. That's something we're actually trying to change right now. And so I think many people who are listening, actually, they can empathize with, big new apartment building, expensive, displacement. I see where that comes from, right? But if we keep saying no, all we're doing is now pushing all the development in these historically Black and brown neighborhoods. Our historically very affluent neighborhoods remain the same, and they hold the power, they hold the money. And so I just hope that we can kind of change that understanding of when we say no to housing, we're saying no housing in these affluent neighborhoods, right? That it already exists. The zoning already is in our
and can you drill into that example you gave just a little bit more? Because I think that's the big thing I hear, is that all the new stuff that's going up is quote unquote luxury housing. And none of this is going to be affordable for the people who are being displaced. That concern is very real, and we have seen people displaced. And so can you just talk a little bit about sort of how YIMBY intersects with affordability, even if it means building a new apartment?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Absolutely. So we have our evictions attorney here who can definitely speak to that. But truly, Actually, yeah, go ahead. Start.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of literature among academics who are focusing on urban planning, urban economics, displacement, sociology journals, and stuff like this. And our read of that empirical literature is there's no way to avoid displacement without building more housing. It can be the case that particular projects can lead to like very hyper-localized displacement, even if they are beneficial for the broader housing market, even for like lower income people. So there's a couple different phenomenon to kind of keep in mind here. There's a concept in the housing economics literature known as filtering, or sometimes it's called moving chains. And there's been some pretty interesting and careful studies coming out the last couple of years out of places like Finland and some other places on the east coast of the United States that have really drilled down into the data of where people go when new apartments or houses get built. Because yes, I mean, if a project is not subsidized, it's going to be expensive, just like a new car is more expensive than a used car. So what happens more often than not is that, you know, wealthy people will move into the newest units, and then that opens up the unit that those wealthy people were living in before, and so on and so forth. And this effect can be stronger or weaker depending on the market conditions. There's some research suggesting that the effect is significantly weaker in markets that are extremely compacted with low supply. But the way that I like to think about this, not in so much like the highfalutin academic jargon way, but just like kind of think about what happens when you don't build housing. Richer people don't just evaporate. They move into lower quality housing stock that they would have bought otherwise and push out the people who might have been more appropriate for that housing mode. So that's like kind of like the way that I think about YIMBY most directly is there's just no way to house everybody without building more. And especially when you consider how many people have been displaced from Denver. Yes, there have been a lot of people moving here. Yes, there's been a lot of housing built. But I think there is something like 60, 80,000 eviction filings in the state of Colorado every year. Is a pretty typical number. Yeah. Not all of those end in displacement. You know, one of the things that we fought for is the ability of tenants to cure non-payment action after the demand expires. Mm-hmm. And that's enabled, along with things like rental assistance and other kinds of subsidies, that's really enabled people to fight these cases where they just had no way of fighting them before. But rental assistance and small pockets of subsidies aren't going to solve the overarching affordability crisis, which really is related to just our relative inability to build. It's a systemic issue, and it relates to how we build our cities. You know, I listen to your guys' podcast, and like, you know, there's so much about, you know, how we need to transform our cities to make them more sustainable, make them more walkable, make them safer for pedestrians, in all these ways. And the good thing is, a lot of the things that we need to do those things are also the same things we need to do to get a handle on the housing affordability crisis. If we build that infill development near transit lines, if we build walkable mixed-use communities, people's transportation costs are going to go down. Landlords will face more competition for tenants and be forced to reduce their rents. And this is something that we've seen empirically. You know, in Denver last year, we built like 30,000 units, something like that. It was the most that we built in quite a while. And for the first time in, I think, over a decade, rents fell. They didn't fall by a lot. We got to build more, but it shows it's proof of concept that this works.
Yeah, exactly. And really, when we look at how cities were formed, I mean, it was in fear, right? People were fearful of someone who looked different than them. And so we put these zoning laws in and said this historically black neighborhood is going to be zoned multi-unit significantly, right? Like the ability to build whatever you want, right? And where we had covenants and HOAs. Like these are all these like laws that started creating particularly to exclude black and brown people. I think we even have a neighborhood in Denver. They found like no Jews allowed as well. I mean, these laws are rooted in some very, very problematic things that we are seeing are impacting us today. And so when a developer today comes and says, and I grew up in the 90s, right, with all of like, I saw Up, right? Like where developers are really, you know, out to hurt us all. And I understand why we have that sentiment. But truly, like we're sitting in a house right now built by somebody. So when a developer comes to a city and says, okay, people need somewhere to live. I'm trying to make some money. Where am I going to build this house? Right? You cannot just go anywhere in the city and build something. It's so hard. And when you like really look at like what is needed, what is even wanted. I mean, people want to live in a net zero accessible home that they can, just a 2-bedroom apartment. That is so, where can we buy that? Right? That does not exist. Right. And so whenever someone comes to council with this idea of, if I'm saying no, I'm actually helping, all you're doing is helping the affluent neighborhoods stay affluent, right? We are not creating more housing. And so I can scream it from the rooftops. It's like something I'm really passionate about. So, and that's why we've been involved.
I'm also hearing here in the kind of conversation so far, it's a really big tent.
Yes.
Right? So, you know, for instance, you have a very specific experience, Rob, related to your clients and the stories that you've heard and the people that you work with. And that's a very powerful statistic, right? If like 90% of evictions happen because they weren't able to pay rent, like that just tells you something about economic reality. That's a very good reason then to get motivated and to think more and question and try and, you know, understand and even, you know, undo sort of these exclusive policies. But you can also be an environmentalist and realize at the end of the day that infill development is one of the sort of greenest policies that we can adopt. You can just be somebody who wants less drive-throughs and thinks that, you know, if we get an apartment building there, that might be like nicer than the sort of vacant parking lot or the drive-through. Like, you can have a lot of different reasons to come to the same conclusion here.
Yes.
Because wanting something to stay the same is one particular sort of style and point of view. Being open to change means lots of different changes.
Yes.
We don't know, you, me, James, Anna, we don't know what building might be built when something gets upzoned. But that possibility of change for so many different reasons can be exciting and motivating in a proactive way. You know, again, as you say, it's proactive.
And think about this, like new buildings have so many more restrictions with it. So in a good way too. So a new building has ADA requirements. It has a higher threshold for fire hazards, right? They have to build a sidewalk. And I don't know if you've been in Denver walking these sidewalks, but they're atrocious.
Yeah. Right.
My daughter actually still has a scar on her knee from falling on a sidewalk outside her door. But yes, like change in this case is good, right? And so housing policy, transit policy, environment policy are all connected. And that's what's so beautiful about our world is it's opened up for me just meeting all sorts of different advocates in every corner, right? Like seeing how housing and transit and housing and environment go side to side, right? And as we kind of like look into the future that seems so gray and uncertain, it brings me a lot of comfort knowing that like, okay, we're on the right side here, right? Like we are fighting for housing justice, which hopefully helping with the environment.
I'll tell you a story that sticks with me all the time. I think about this all the time. I remember taking the 16. I used to live up here on West Colfax, taking the 16 into work. And anyone who takes the 16 knows, weirdly, like the bus just kind of stops at Decatur Federal. Sometimes the bus driver gets off and like has a smoke break or whatever. And it can be a little confusing. So there was a girl in front of me who turned around and said, "Do we all have to get off?" And it's like, no. We're just waiting until the schedule kind of catches up. Then we start talking and, you know, I ask, "Oh, you know, what do you do? You know, where are you from? Oh, did you move here? Or, you know, are you from here?" She said, "Oh, no, I moved here from Oklahoma." I said, "Oh, what brought you?" She said, "Well, my wife is trans and it wasn't safe there." Oh. And like just the sheer simple response, you know, she wasn't like, you know, that was not then the most tearful thing. But the fact then that they had a place to go, you know, I think that's the other thing that we like know as people who live in Denver in particular, what we previously introduced in an episode as the liberal city of Denver, is that this is also an open place.
Yes.
There are economic opportunities here. There are social and cultural opportunities here. And we don't know who that next person is that might be moving here. We don't have to know that to still want that person to be here, right? Yes. If she had told me, "I moved here because like my pharma job brought me here," you know, like I don't, that's fine too. I mean, that's life, right? Like I don't know the motivation of everybody and we don't stop people at the city borders and screen them for the reason that they're moving here. But we have to consider the sort of sum total of the opportunities that might bring somebody to this, you know, accepting community. So I just think about her all the time.
I love that story, right? And that's the heart of YIMBY, truly, is everyone is welcome here. We are not coming into Denver and then shutting the door behind us saying, "Sorry, it's full." And that's actually our motto. Denver's not full.
Yes. Yeah.
it's so great. I mean, it really is like the foundational aspect of it. And like, I hate to like bring it down this road, but the comparison has to be made. There are other states that are building a lot of housing.
Yeah.
Texas is building a lot of housing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are facing some really difficult decisions as a result, because Texas is a lot more affordable than Colorado in most respects as a result. What does that mean for people who are trying to live their most authentic selves? Yeah. It's a real conundrum. And that kind of like basic liberalism undergirds a lot of my personal YIMBYism.
It's worth bringing up that there's still a lot to be done. I mean, Denver, as we start, is very unaffordable, right? Like, I don't know if you guys know this. I live in an affordable unit, and it's still pretty expensive, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's hard. Like,
you got so lucky to get that.
I know, and I got so lucky already. And I'm very grateful. I'm not trying to not express my gratefulness, but just to say that, like, gosh, I'm doing pretty well, and yet I'm still having a hard time, right? And so just imagine all the other people in this town. And so we say this because there's still a lot to be done. We do have some pretty great legislation coming down the pipe. I don't know if you guys have heard of YIMBY.
YIMBY?
This was a new acronym to me this year. YIMBY.
Yes, in God's backyard.
Yes.
Wait, what?
Yes, you did.
No way.
Yes.
What?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes, in God's backyard. Right. So there's this piece of legislation is targeting the underutilized land a lot of churches hold. Right. And so kind of getting out of that bureaucracy of the red tape of like allowing them to use this land to house people. We have single stair or smart stair bill coming. The no pricing coordination between landlords. So
right? The rental algorithm bill. This is specifically designed at things like RealPage that collect data from disparate landlords, and in my view, just like commit gross violations of antitrust law by coordinating their prices. And more data has come out in recent years that show this to be like an increasing cause of increased rents. Another interesting facet to this is there's a major supply component to this as well. So the Biden administration, when they released some action against this, and we're trying to do some stuff at the end of the Biden administration, their economists found that RealPage is able to extract higher rents of places with more restricted supply. So that, I think, it really speaks to the need for a coordinated approach in terms of getting that supply on track, introducing more competition for existing landlords, and also having economic and antitrust policy that is geared toward helping those markets flourish in the way that they ideally would. So if there are people out there who look into the future and it might seem a little gray or uncertain, I mean, we just want to remind them there's a group of people out here trying to make the world a better place, trying to make Denver specifically a better place, Colorado even. I mean, the state legislation impacts the whole state. There's a lot of ways you can get involved with our organization. You can simply show up and have fun and chit chat with us during happy hours. That's one way to just to get to know who we are. We're pretty fun. Right, right, Rob? So, we're pretty fun. Well, once we get all of our housing wins, we're going to be a fun social club once we achieve everything that we set out to.
Mm-hmm. And you've already achieved a lot. I think that maybe to your point about like looking into the future, this grayness, right? Like, let's be honest, we're talking about the federal administration right now just kind of sucks, and it's overwhelming to look out and feel so powerless. But you're a group that has created a lot of power and has changed things, legitimately changed things. Actions of your members have made a real difference.
Yes.
And continue to do so. And you continue to have fights that are lined up that you can go in and plug in and not feel so powerless anymore.
Yeah.
Let me tell you the weirdest small world moment. Just yesterday, I was at my local gay sports bar that I love to go to watch the Nuggets, and a guy sits next to me, and we start chit-chatting, and it turns out he's in town for like an urban planning conference going on right now, and then, we start talking about that, and then he introduces himself. His name's Max Dubler. He's like a California YIMBY guy, like at the highest kind of level of that advocacy.
Oh my goodness.
So I was just sitting chatting with this guy yesterday, and like, I mean, so quickly Colorado actually has become the envy of a lot of other places. He was talking about their ADU bill in California, which you'll read positive press to the moon, but they have like a height limit of like 18 feet on these like ADUs that can be built in California. Wow. Like we have more permissive in a lot of things that we've passed so quickly here.
Yes, and thank you for saying that because we...
Rob, you're tightening your face.
If only this was we're in an audio format, everybody can see Rob.
It's like Two different opinions. Not that we're, of course, of the same opinion, but I try to see the more positive outlook, and I appreciate like having the need to see what we could do better. But Rob, yes, what were you going to say?
I mean, I think that we still have a really long way to go.
100%.
It's still not legal to build anything more than basically a duplex on like 70 or 80% of Denver's residential land. That's a climate crime, in my opinion. And we are out of time on the climate crisis.
Yes. Yes.
And my clients are still getting displaced every day. People like my clients. So, I really still feel a strong sense of urgency about this. And I think that there are a lot of ways where if you really look and, dig into the weeds of the stuff that's happened in Colorado, both at the state and local level, where it starts to look more like problematically like California, where it's not as permissive as you would like. And there are these other problems. For example, the statewide transit-oriented upzoning bill last year, huge. One of the most important bills for increasing transit-oriented housing supply in the state of Colorado probably ever. It also doesn't really apply to most of Denver. It has a very small effect on what Denver is required to build because Denver has basically already met its obligations under that bill because they were weakened as a process of going through the legislature, which is, how things work there. So, we really can't afford to lose vigor in our fight right now. Like, the iron is really hot. There's the Abundance book that just came out that's generating a lot of national discussion because it's to my understanding, I haven't read it, but it's like a reaction to why do the forces of fascism keep winning elections in America? And a lot of the reason is like Democrats are really screwing the pooch in terms of building enough homes in blue areas to make them affordable and sustainable. That's what I've heard about it anyway. And I mean, that's certainly an opinion that I hold, at least. Maybe I'm just like imputing that onto the authors.
I agree, Rob. Like you're 100% correct. It is not a time to lose vigor and motivation. However, we also need to celebrate our wins.
Yes.
Right? Yes. Because we have to stay motivated. And I remember...
It's part of the vigor, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's what keeps you on it. And so there was 2018, I don't know if you guys remember, it was a huge development by Zocalo. And it was in Sloan's Lake neighborhood. And it had so much opposition. It was a parking lot, guys.
This is literally
it was
surface
a parking lot. Surface parking lot. And that was one of the most organized, that was like a real turning point in our chapter's history of like, we just showed up with 50 people wearing YIMBY shirts and we were like, build this apartment or building, right? And it did. And it passed. And it barely passed. And it felt so good. And I remember I was actually feeling very much after this one, interestingly, much like Rob is, of just being like, oh my God, there's so much more to do. This is literally scratching the surface. And then a friend kind of checked me and he was like, listen, you've got to just celebrate this win and let it sink in so you feel it. And so I appreciate your, I guess, call out of like what we've accomplished. And so I 100% agree. I think we have changed the conversation. And it was really great to hear that at our legislative kickoff. Senator Bridges came up and spoke about his modular housing bill. And he looked at the crowd and he's like, 5 years ago, there would have been 8 people here.
Yeah. Cheering on modular housing as a subject line for a bill. But no, I was there too. That room was full.
Oh, you were there?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Fun. It was a good time. But I also kind of sat with that in a minute. I was like, yeah, look at us. Like, there's so much here. People making those connections between transit and housing and environment and housing. And you look at our group of YIMBYs. I mean, I am a teacher. You're an evictions lawyer. I mean, we have so many different types of
Eviction
people.
Defense lawyer.
Excuse me.
Nice.
I
play. Very different. We have, yes. There's a lot of different people in our group, and we'd love to have more. Right? We
need more.
We need more. Exactly. We need more.
If you're listening to this podcast and you even vaguely agree with this stuff, we're a big tent. We don't demand any specific ideology.
Yeah.
We need that kind of diversity of thought in our group, and we need size. I mean, NIMBYism is still extremely powerful in Colorado and in Denver.
Yes.
And like I said, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on the policy level. Yeah, I am the membership chair of YIMBY Denver, so I would be remiss in not saying, please consider joining us. I mean, at a bare minimum, consider joining our email list so you can see what we're up to.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I was saying. So if I understand sometimes it can be intimidating joining an organization. So if that feels intimidating, come to one of our social events, meet us, talk to us, get to know us. We have committees you can join if you just want to get your feet a little wet. Like, what does this look like? Help that way. Joining our mailing list, like you'll get more updated information about what kind of legislation we're supporting. And really, strength comes in numbers, right? And the NIMBYs have had that for a very long time. And it's time that scale turns in our favor.
One of the very first things I ever did in the urbanist scene in Denver is go to a YIMBY happy hour. Just totally out of the blue. I was like, this stuff I'd been reading about it, kind of been cerebrally in the literature, this kind of stuff. And I was like, I got to go meet other people who are into this. And so truly, like, before I was really doing a lot of transit advocacy or other types of advocacy, before Andy and I ever met, that was like one of the very first way I plugged in. So very welcoming and open. I think I got my first beer free. So I don't know if you still do that, but
we do that periodically.
Oh, okay, we might make some
acceptance. Right. So just tell them that the Denver Urbanism podcast sent you. And you get your first beer free.
There we go. Okay.
And we will include all links in the show notes so people can get plugged in, get signed up on that newsletter if they want to learn more and figure out what level of involvement
engagement
is comfortable for them.
Mm-hmm. So then maybe we'll kind of just finish by, again, so call to action here. So what's coming up next? What are like some of the challenges that YIMBY is still currently experiencing? I mean, or that this kind of movement and this sort of proactive, pro-building, pro-neighbor kind of movement is running up against,
Well, yeah, we talked a little bit about what's coming in their state legislation, but quite frankly, we still have a lot to do within our city. Our city council isn't as aggressive, as just gung-ho about building housing as we hoped they were. Yeah, and I know with the failure of 2R, I suspect there might be some sort of measure coming on the horizon with that as well, similar to that measure. And we have this big parking decision coming up in the summer. And we're hoping to eliminate parking. So for those who may not know what that means, we want to build housing for people, not cars, right? And so when we are constantly funding and just elevating the needs of car ownership over pedestrians, we're just not creating a walkable city. We're not creating a friendly city, a community-oriented city. And people, I don't know if you guys know this, they love their cars. And hearing about a parking restriction coming up can be really frightening. So having more people show up, writing letters to council about that, even showing up to council when that happens. That's definitely something we could do.
But nothing about this bill. There was a state bill that sort of forces the issue in some way locally, but the city's considering going further here. But nothing about this actually says you are not allowed to build parking into your project.
Correct.
It just no longer requires some amount based on a gross square footage calculation.
Get this, their law, I don't know if it's still this way, but not too long ago, every door required one parking spot. And so when you think of a huge apartment building, this then has to be
a parking podium on the bottom, and it makes for bad urbanism.
Yes.
Like if you walk around a city and everywhere around you is just an entrance to a parking garage.
Yes.
That city sucks.
Right.
And it's expensive. The consumer's paying for that, right?
I've seen different statistics on how much a mandated parking spot adds to the construction cost of a unit. But it can very typically be $30,000, $50,000, $60,000.
Yes, which is a couple $100s on your rent every month.
And worse than that, that's if the project even gets built. Parking mandates also mean that a lot of projects just don't get built
because they don't pencil out. Some financiers not going to.
They don't pencil out. They build out in Douglas County instead, so they get sprawl. And what that means is that landlords in Denver have less competition, and they can just keep jacking that price right up and working more with RealPage to fix those prices and we can do better than that.
And what that also creates is these small community developers will not build in Denver. They will much more. I promise you, they will not. The only type of developer that can even afford to break ground in Denver is this huge New York, California developer, which I'm not trying to shine hate or cast hate on New York or California, but it'd be great to have a local developer here, right? We want people who are in the community, who know the community, building here. And so we're making it so that they can't. That's a problem.
So that's one thing that's coming up as a sort of fight. Is there anything else that you think maybe is just it's a mental block that you just still see locally that people kind of that it feels like an obstacle here.
Can I answer your first question again first? There is talk of some kind of, what do they call it, expanding housing options or something like that?
Oh, yes. We don't know what it's called yet because it's kind of like on the DL, but I think the city council is thinking of
maybe some kind of like small missing middle bill.
Yes.
So like, like small plexes.
Yeah.
Like we don't know what size yet. It might be like triplexes, but I hope it's not just that. But
So not city, but statewide then.
City.
City. Oh, it is city. Okay. Yeah, okay.
So we don't know what that's going to look like yet, but it's going to be a big fight. It's not
as usual.
As usual. It's not maybe the one that I would want to have right now. I would rather see like big transit corridor upzonings. But, other cities have incorporated this into their kind of suite of upzonings and have gotten some modest construction out of it. So it's definitely something that we should do. And it's going to be a big fight and it's coming up soon. So if you join YIMBY Denver, or at least join our mailing list, you can see what's coming down the pike as we about it ourselves, and you can learn about how you can choose to hopefully get involved in helping us make that happen to increase housing affordability and the sustainability of our city.
Yeah, and I would say when we think about like a mental block in Denver, I mean, there is a lot of resistance even in a person who wouldn't consider themselves an NIMBY, and even probably a progressive. Like they would consider themselves a progressive, probably consider themselves a social justice warrior of saying like, no, like this new building is bad for the community, right? It equals displacement. And so I just think, and I understand because housing is a lot about numbers and blah, 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 boring, boring, boring. But if we really look at the root cause, when we say no to this house, we actually are still creating displacement. Because then we're, as I said earlier, right, we're sending money more to those affluent neighborhoods. We want Crestmore Park. We want Hilltop. We want, I'm saying the dirty words. We want Country Club. Yeah. We want them. Park, right, to hold their end of the deal too. There should be density in those neighborhoods. And that's what we want to see, right? That's why we want to see a complete, am I allowed to say this right? Don't come after me. We want to see, right, like apartments in all of Denver. And so
it's the most equitable way to do it.
It's the most equitable way. Exactly. And so I think with this when you say mental block, I don't think we want to get you guys there of understanding that's what we see.
And that's, why we support like tenant protections and increasing funding for subsidized housing, because, to the extent that, there is a worry of new construction leading to like, displacement on like the hyper-local level, even if it improves outcomes regionally, which is what some of the evidence can sometimes show, depending on market conditions. The answer should not be, well, we're not going to build anything and then just make everything worse for everybody. The answer should be, we're going to do this and we're going to be sensitive to the needs of the people in this micro community. And that's where, subsidized housing can come into play. That's where tenant protections can come into play. There's a whole suite of different tools that city governments can do to make sure that the housing still gets built while also being sensitive to those needs. And that's really where we need to be, because anything else is just more of the status quo.
Yeah, so again, we hope you guys come hang out with us. We're pretty fun. And
Anna's fun.
I mean, more. But our president at our legislative kickoff quoted the Lorax, which is one of my favorite books. And so if you ever get in those moments of just like, why do we do this? Just think of the Lorax. Mm-hmm. And unless someone cares a whole awful lot, nothing will get better. It's not.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you both so much for being on today and talking through some of the recent wins in YIMBY, some of the upcoming actions that we can expect to see. I think it is no exaggeration to say that the city 20 years from now is going to look very different from the city looked, 20 years back because of these exact efforts and because of this type of action. So if people want to get involved, there's great information online. The YIMBY website's a great resource, and we look forward to, getting people engaged.
Yes, thank you guys.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much.
Yes.
The Denver Urbanism Podcast is a production of longtime blog Denver Infill and sister blog Denver Urbanism. You can find out more on denverurbanism.com, and we look forward to seeing your responses in the comments. Bye-bye.
But
we are not sponsored by Ezra Klein and his co-author. Just if you want to read the book, there's the library.
Although, Ezra, if you're listening and
you want to come on the podcast,
chat, sure, emails are open.
Absolutely.